were there as well. So, welcome to the third webinar in a series where the Fralin Museum of Art and the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection are both museums of the University of Virginia, are investigating art forms that don't typically show up in the art museum. We felt that there are all kinds of art forms that are culturally dense, deeply tied to identity, and formally and technically complex that deserve our attention that we don't get to talk about enough. Often these are taken for granted because they're part of our daily lives and aren't sort of set aside or labeled as fine art or as deserving our attention. But we're going to explore the art of food this evening, and each speaker is going to talk for 3 to 4 minutes about their own relationship with the world of making food into art. And then we have a few questions that apply to most or all of the speakers that will guide a discussion, and then we're going to open it up to the live Q&A. I'm going to hand it over now to Lisa to introduce our first speaker, and we're going to switch out this PowerPoint here too. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited about this evening. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panel, who are all just really fantastic, fascinating people in their fields. My name is Lisa Jevac, and I'm the assistant to the director and special projects coordinator at the Fralin Museum of Art at University of Virginia. And Lauren, I'm going to need you to stop sharing this. There we go. Okay. All right, so I'm going to introduce each one of our speakers individually, and they are going to talk for a few minutes about themselves, and then we'll get into some conversation with them. All right. So I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Arley Arrington. Arley is the owner of Arley Cakes, a baked goods company in Richmond, Virginia, that blends the fight for equality into ordinary practice of cake. Building on over a decade of experience in both the food and nonprofit industries, she has created a space that invites people to engage in social justice in new ways. Arley is a big fan of Beyonce, wine, cheese, and Star Wars. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Arley.
Thank you. So my name is Arley Arrington. I'm the owner of Arley Cakes, which is a Richmond-based cottage bakery that I actually started in Charlottesville about 5 years ago. So when I was in school, I took a lot of art classes growing up. And after college, I kind of lost such easy access to studio spaces and instruction, and just having the space to create art in the traditional sense in my life. So I kind of turned to baking as a creative outlet. I've always been someone who loves to build and create and just do things with my hands, and baking kind of became that new avenue for me to be able to do that. So I was working at a local nonprofit and also waitressing at a restaurant in downtown Charlottesville. And eventually I decided that I really wanted to combine these two worlds that I was living in, the world of community development and the world of food. So that was how I started Arley Cakes. My ultimate goal in starting the business was to provide job opportunities and training to people who oftentimes lack access to those things, especially at an entry level. And yeah, I'm still working towards that, trying to figure that out. In 2017, I started to focus more on using my platform to start conversations about different social issues that I just really wanted more people to be talking about. So that has kind of morphed over the last 3 years in a few different ways. So, you know, I've done things like fundraisers and auctions for national organizations and people doing work locally. I also just sometimes will make work just for the sake of sparking a conversation or just bringing light into different issues. So I'm still working towards, that ultimate goal of having a physical space and employees and trying to figure out what that will look like. But for now, I'm really just grateful to be using this work to create some positive change in my community. So that's kind of how I landed here. It's where I am now, and I'm just glad to be here.
Great, thank you, Arley. All right, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Elle Simone Scott. Elle Simone is executive editor and inclusion leader at America's Test Kitchen. She is also a food stylist for Cook's Country, an on-screen test cook for America's Test Kitchen, and host of an upcoming podcast. Elle creates media content for both ATK television segments and ATK social media. She also works to boost the America's Test Kitchen diversity efforts and promote a culture of inclusion with a specific focus on recruiting, mentorship, and retention. As the founder of She Chef Incorporated, a professional networking organization and social enterprise, Elle provides mentoring to women chefs of color pursuing culinary arts as a career. With her creative eye for telling a story with food and her unique contribution to the dialogue surrounding women in business, Elle has appeared on Food Network Magazine, The Cooking Channel, The Katie Couric Show, CBS Corporation, ABC's The Chew, and Bravo's Chef Roble and Company. Elle has been featured in stories in the Boston Globe, Forbes, Eater, and on the Tom Joyner Morning Show and National Public Radio. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Elle Simone Scott.
Thank you, Lisa. Just so you all know, that bio is slightly dated because my podcast is now up and running, and it's on all podcast platforms, and it's called The Walk-In, hence the picture of me in the walk-in. I'm very excited to be here. My background in food pretty much kind of starts, probably like most cooks, with in the professional restaurant kitchen, and I kind of started my career backwards. I cooked and worked before going to school, and after moving to New York and completing culinary school, I got the fortunate opportunity to intern at the Food Network, which is really where I learned about food styling. It was never a career that I knew of to explore. It was really something that actually just fell into my path, and I never considered myself an artistic person. And I think I found my art through food. I love food so much that I care about how it looks all the time, even in my own refrigerator. I mean, and I don't food style at home, I'm not saying that, but I do like to make sure that the food that I give to people looks beautiful and appetizing. And I think that's probably the most exciting part about my job. I tell people all the time, I have my dream job. All I have to do is cook food, make it look good, and then eat it when I'm done with it. So it's an exciting career for me. I am very fortunate also to be at America's Test Kitchen because it affords me the opportunity to have my food seen on a very large scale, which in New York is difficult. It's a very competitive culture. There are not a lot of, food styling is becoming more popular or more known. But the world of food styling is very competitive, and to get the cover of a book or a magazine is a very coveted opportunity. And having been with America's Test Kitchen, that is something that I've been afforded multiple times. So I'm grateful for that. And as you can see, from the photos, I really just want you to want to eat the food. I don't want you to think the food is too pretty to eat. That's kind of the point. And I really, I feel like food is a revolution. Food is the thing that brings all people to the table. And when I'm styling food, I'm thinking about and not in the literal way, but as much as possible, I'm thinking about every kind of person that I know. And I want them to look at this food and feel like it's attainable, it's affordable, it's delectable. I want people to look at my food and feel like it's an experience that they can have and share, in life. And I think that that is important. Food sustains us, and it has to do with everything. It's political, it's personal, it's emotional. Um, and so I just want to be able to tell stories with food, and food styling does that for me. So I feel very fortunate to have this opportunity to talk about it with you all, and I'm looking forward to your question.
Thank you, Elle. Okay, now I would like to introduce Charles Spence. Professor Charles Spence is the head of the Cross-Modal Research Laboratory at Oxford University. He is interested in how people perceive the world around them, in particular, how our brains manage to process the information from each of our own different senses, such as smell, taste, sight, hearing, and touch, to form the extraordinary, rich, multisensory experiences that fill our daily lives. His research focuses on how a better understanding of the human mind will lead to the better design of multisensory foods, products, interfaces, and environments in the future. His research calls for a radical new way of examining and understanding the senses that has major implications for the way in which we design everything from household products to mobile phones, and from the food we eat to the places in which we work and live. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Charles Spence.
Thank you. So, I guess I'm not a chef as such, certainly not, but a psychologist, nor an artist, nor an art historian. So, slightly strange position to be in. And yet, I think that over the last few years, I've become very interested in the visual appearance of food and the connection between food and art. And really, I'm trying to address the question of, do we eat first with our eyes? And here we see just two dishes that we've worked on the left, the Picasso dish, on the right, a Kandinsky painting transformed into a salad with Chef Charles Michel. And both dishes we've kind of studied in the lab to try and understand how important is it what a dish looks like to what it tastes like, and how much you enjoy the experience, and ultimately how much you're willing to pay for that experience. The dish on the left is sort of an interesting one for me, because it looks like nothing really. It's a duck dish served by Chef Joseph Youssef of Kitchen Theory in London, but built out of basic psychology principles. And if you see the dish, the sort of right side of the dish has got some duck there and some beetroot and some micro herbs. But what's on the left is kind of the interesting part, because that is really a silhouette of Picasso's face, inverted. Most people struggle to see at first, but eventually they see Picasso in this plate of food. And once you've seen Picasso, you cannot unsee him. Your brain has changed in some interesting way. And this is a dish that's come kind of straight out of psychology, trying to translate visual illusions onto the plate. On the right, we have the Kandinsky dish, and Kandinsky, an artist who's kind of synesthetic, kind of interested in communicating emotion through color and form. And when the young chef Charles Michel saw this painting of Kandinsky's, he thought, well, as a chef, I'm also interested in communicating emotion with my diners. And aren't I an artist too? And this was kind of the result of that. And I came in not as the chef creating the dish, but as a psychologist trying to understand how much more would you pay for a dish when plated this way than some other. So really my question is, how important is eye appeal? Do we really eat first with the eyes? And how much more would we pay for a dish when plated beautifully? And now, sort of principles here. This is another dish from Chef Joseph Youssef, the Booba Kiki dish, where one side of the plate is more Booba, one side of the plate is more Kiki, meaningless terms, but the chef has taken the insights from the psychological sciences about sound symbolism and translated them to tastes, into textures that you, the diner, can experience and hopefully understand just from the shape of the elements or their taste or mouthfeel, which side of the plate is Booba and Kiki. a dish that's served in the restaurant, but which also the diners, by their response to this dish, can provide insights into research and to academic papers. And so we look at these dishes like the ones we've seen and sort of wonder, are there any principles at play here? How do we know what would look good on the plate? We can try lots of things and assess them, and maybe we'll find the answer. Or maybe there are principles that we can extract from the world of painting, because psychologists have looked for a long time at the world of painting, and that we like balance, we like harmony, we like this and we like that. And maybe plating is like painting, and the same rules apply. And if so, we've got some principles to apply. And this is just one dish from a Sao Paulo chef, Alberto Landgraf, who we've worked with. His signature dish, 3 onions with some spume and stuff on the plate. And with his permission, we've taken his dish, put it on the internet, and spun it around. And each dot you see around this plate of food is a person who said, that is the orientation in which I would like to see that dish of food. And we've got ideas from psychology, from perception research, that you don't like things pointing towards you because they might be kind of dangerous, they might hurt you, like a dagger or a knife. We like things pointing away. And then we can see here that the majority of the dots, the majority of the people said, yes, they like the food pointing away from the diners, as the chef has intuitively picked up in this case. And so that's what we do with dishes like this. Is another one that just 3 or 4 seared scallops, just in this case, testing in the Science Museum in London with thousands of people. Which would you prefer? 2 plates of food there, just press left or right. We've got thousands and thousands of responses, and here trying to test the thing that many chefs are taught in culinary school, that odd is better than even. Japanese stone gardens have to have odd numbers of stones. German flower sellers are told only serve odd numbers of flowers. Is it also true on the plate? Our research with about 5,000 people turns out to show diners don't seem to care whether it's odd or even on the plate. What they judge is which plate looks bigger, which has more food, more nutrition, and that's what you kind of go for. So in this case, our research suggests, contrary to what chefs have been taught in some cases, is the amount of food rather than odd or even that really matters. And then we have also another version of a dish served not very fancy as such, but served in Oxford in one of the dining halls, where half the diners would see the plate of food shown on the left, stacked up the elements on the right, spread out over the plate. Which would you prefer? How much would you pay for each plate of food? And it turns out the plate on the right that seems to have more food is the one that seems people will appreciate more than the stacked element. If I asked you which was more the creative plate of food, perhaps you might go with the left plate instead. And here another set of dishes from one of those Somerville dining hall experiments here in Oxford, where you try and measure scientifically the art of plating to see what people like and what they do not like. And this is all well and good for the high-end fancy restaurants, but in the next picture, hopefully you can see one example, again from work with Joseph Youssef, from an insect-based menu where I've got a dish called Pollen and the Bee, where through beautiful plating, we're trying to nudge diners towards a more insect-based cuisine. I'm not doing it by telling people that they should eat insects, that it's good for the planet or good for them, but by eye appeal and by great taste. That coming from the chef rather than from myself, but as a scientist, we can bring in some insights about how best to present the dish. And for me, then, this becomes a really interesting area, one that's not been studied by psychology, about the importance of plating, about the importance of eye appeal, about what insights you can get from the art of painting for the art and perhaps the science of plating, how we can use those insights to nudge people towards healthier food products, and ultimately how I think there's something really interesting going on currently about still lifes of food in the art gallery, and the way that artists have picked up some of the most delicious features. So I'm really interested in the juiciness of a lemon and how 17th century Dutch artists picked up, how did they illustrate the juiciness of a lemon that would make you salivate? That was their aim. and how can we take those insights and incorporate them in plating or in packaging design today.
So Charles, we have just somebody in the Kandinsky image, or the one of Picasso, was just one. She said she also saw a dragon. Was that deliberate? Was there a deliberate dragon in there as well, or no?
So more of a resource ink blot, I think, maybe.
Okay, yes. Okay. So no deliberation on the dragon then. Cool. We have another question, but we might just save that one for the end. So thanks. We'll move on to Craig.
All right, thank you, Charles. Now, last but not least, I would like to introduce Craig Thornton. Craig is the creator and chef of Wolvesmouth and has been cooking professionally for 19 years. Though food was always a central focus, the creation of Wolvesmouth 12 years ago was the realization of an equally important goal: to blend art and installations with the dining experience, pushing the boundaries of all the senses in one physical, thematically linked space. Over the last decade, Thornton has created installations for museums such as Santa Monica Museum of Art and MoCA Los Angeles, as well as experience throughout the country and abroad. Welcome from Los Angeles, Craig Thornton.
Hello, yeah, I'm Craig. So I started Wolvesmouth, just like it said, about 12 years ago. When I was younger, I was always into a lot of painting. I was doing a lot of oil painting. Stuff I was mostly focused on at the time was a lot of reverse oil and glass. And I think how it ends up tying back in, other than just, I think my obsession with color and composition, is painting with the oil and glass. You had to work in your details first, and you had to work backwards. And so for a lot of the stuff that I do, it's all about being planned out and more methodically kind of built out to where it all is one cohesive kind of narrative together. And so I think that kind of just led into my obsession with the food aspect. But when I started cooking, I just quit all art. I quit everything that I was doing to solely focus on just understanding the actual foundational techniques of just really understanding how to cook and all the logistics and just everything else to do it properly. Because I think that when you start kind of pushing towards that more artistic direction of just with food in general, you can go from zero to like Rainforest Cafe really quick, where it could become very just overly kitschy, or just kind of these directions where it just doesn't come off as intended. And so it's making sure that first and foremost, the textures, the temperatures, the flavors are all correct, and then from there building out the actual idea and making sure that the colors that I actually want to get in there are I can achieve them through extremely natural means, through technique, only through the food that I'm using, and not going through and using any sort of fake coloring or anything like that. So a lot of the food science ends up getting pushed into it as well. And so probably about 10 years ago was when I always wanted to add this artistic element back into my food. And once I felt, after almost 10 years of cooking, I felt confident enough to start pushing a lot of the art elements back into there, meaning like lighting, space, building out physical sculptures, trying to build out sculptures on the scale of someone like Richard Serra. Like that type of stuff was a lot of stuff that was inspiring to me as far as scale. And obviously with a lot of the lighting and stuff that I do, I'm a very inspired by Terrell, and just a lot of stuff like that. So I went through and studied with a lot of people who do a lot of like artists who do lighting, and just to understand the lighting aspect, and then slowly but surely going through and building out all these other pieces for these installations that I was doing. And the one that you're looking at right here, this was one that I did at Santa Monica Museum. This was part of it. And then I have a couple of more that were, it was all part of these 9 that I want to do. I've already done 4 of them that are of this 9 that are all one big massive installation. So each one of these installations, you're not able to really get the scale of it here, but they're about, this museum was about 4,000 square feet, and then the one I did at Mocha was about probably 6,000 square feet. Then I did another one that was probably about 10,000 square feet. And so it was kind of like the whole idea was each one of these art installations, I was going to pull a dish from one of them, and there would be 9 dishes total that were kind of like representative of the entire installation. And then at the end, you would have all these installations that all built together, and they were kind of being told in a linear story over the course of, 10, 15 years. And some of the audience would know, some of the audience probably wouldn't know that I was, as far as like the actual diners there, people, I think after about the 4th one started to realize, because I would leave certain elements from a previous installation, and it was kind of like a snake shedding its skin slowly, that was kind of snaking its way through all these installations and kind of telling these different stories. But I think that the centralized theme of, I think what was the most inspiring thing for me at the time, and that I've kind of just held on to for so long, is this weird subconscious, this subconscious, whatever it is, of like exploration of how we are able to have all of this stuff going around through life, and whether it's death or destruction or decay, and all these things happening around us, and still being able to actually just move forward, and the stuff that we're able just to kind of push out of our heads. So like, for instance, like this one on the left, this dish, it's called Wolves in the Snow. And this dish, it was basically, it's a venison dish that kind of was like a kill scene on like a forest floor with the forest floor flavors. But the flavors, it looks aggressive, but the flavors are, I would say, more feminine and a lot more delicate. But when diners would sit down in this installation, you would get a pine scented towel. Like we would soak it in like these pine needles, and then you'd have like this steamed pine scented towel. You'd sit down, and there'd be nothing on the table, and you would be presented with this, and then you have your towel, and then you were basically supposed to eat this with your hands, and then you obviously had the towel to like to wipe off with. But it was just kind of for the first course to like really kind of push people's buttons with the comfort level of seeing something like this put in front of you, and then in the background, just to kind of just to nudge people a little bit more. It was there was this like a decaying fox that was kind of like going on like in this background area. I mean, you didn't have to look at it, but it was there, and it was just kind of the tension of making somebody uncomfortable, but then you also have this flavor that is very delicate, and so it kind of goes against every single thing that's happening in the space and what you're seeing. And so it was just kind of trying to, I don't know, push people a little bit, I guess, for course 1. And then this stuff, it's like Rorschach test, like the ink blot type stuff with, and then to the right, it's just kind of, I don't know, I go through these phases where things like end up going something like might look splattered, and I'll go through this like phase for a while, and then I'll get into another phase where I just like the way that colors run together, and just seeing how people respond to it.
Craig, just really quickly, because I'm sure people are going to ask, what are we looking at right here?
So like this dish is, so it's a ribeye cap. So it's like, so you have the ribeye, and then you have like the eye of it, and then you have like, there's like an outside, there's like a layer of fat and then an outside, and it's just that outside part, which I think is like one of the best parts of all the like all steaks. And then it's like creamed kimchi, and then there's like a beef tongue with caramelized onion and potato that we slowly cook, and that's in there as well. And then there's Asian pear with lime. And then the top is it's a dumpling skin that has like a little bit of squid ink in it. And then the sauce, it's a sauce made from vermouth, reduced, it's like a reduced like onion kind of stock that we make. So it's like a caramelized onion, like vermouth sauce with a little bit of squid ink in it, and then just, and then a little bit of like the orange one has like a little bit of the like reduced creamed kimchi liquid as well.
Cool, thank you. Thank you all for your for sort of introducing yourselves and giving us a sense of your work. We do have a question that is sort of more biographical in nature, so I thought I'd go ahead and take that question. Someone is interested in the professional culinary training that the three chefs attending have had. Can each of you, Craig, Elle, and Arley, just sort of answer that question? Have you had a professional culinary training or no? We'll start with you, Elle. Yeah.
I do have culinary training. I went to culinary school. I also apprenticed with food stylist before becoming an independent food stylist. So I do think that culinary training, to some degree, I don't think you have to choose a program that is the most expensive in the country to be a food stylist, but I do think that some formal training, some knowledge of food as a science is very important to being a successful food stylist.
Thanks, Elle. Arley, do you want to answer that next?
Yeah, I have not received any formal training in culinary school. So I consider myself, for the most part, a self-taught baker. And I'm not a professional stylist by any means, but a lot of the photos of food that I put out, I've taken just learning on my feet, a lot of trial and error. I've also worked under some chefs and pastry chefs that have taught me on the job, but I haven't had any formal education.
Thanks. Craig, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute this thing. There we go. Yeah, I've had training. I went to school for it. Almost 20 years ago. And so I went to culinary school, and then from there I went and worked for, there's a chef named Thomas Keller that I went and worked for, and I kind of was there for a little bit, and then basically mostly cut my teeth doing cooking in Portland, Oregon. I was just cooking at a couple of different restaurants for a while. And then I kind of traveled around working in a lot of different restaurants and mostly I would focus on stuff that was more traditional because I'm just a believer in you've got to understand the foundation of what you're getting into and, learn the rules to break the rules. So that was why I just always kind of focused on stuff that was more traditional to a certain type of cuisine. And then once I felt I had a good enough grasp of that, then I would kind of start focusing in another area.
Cool, thanks. Well, thank you all again for answering those questions. The first direction I wanted to go with sort of asking some of you or all of you this question, as you'd like to answer it, is like how, I mean, obviously we're talking about how food is art, so we know the visual is somewhat important, but to what extent do, like, how much of it is visual? How much of it is olfactory? How much of it is in like the actual sense of taste that infects enjoyment? And I'm sure, Charles, you can sort of weigh in it on percentages, and maybe the answer isn't about percentages, but like maybe for each of you, if you could just kind of weigh in on like, what are you focusing on the most among those three senses? How do you balance those?
Maybe there's a danger of overplaying the visual, but probably in terms of if you're trying to communicate a dish online, especially in the COVID era, then it has to be visual. I can't communicate the smell of a dish to you. I can't communicate the taste of a dish to you. So it all kind of resides primarily in the visual. And in that sense, it becomes much more important. But that's not really how we taste. And philosophers might say, taste, what we taste in the flavor of a dish is really all about what's going on in the tongue, gustation, sweet, sour, bitter, salty, what's going on in the nose, fruity, herbal, bitter, burnt, whatever it might be, creamy, and maybe a trigeminal hit of Chilean pungency. But that's it. That's all the flavor is. And what we see is not part of flavor. And yet it is so core to how we communicate and think about food, I think. And that's all well and good. And certainly our research says, well, the more attractive a dish looks, the better it tastes. But at the same time, there is that worry out there that there are people who are styling or making dishes so they look beautiful. But I have my chef colleagues who say, I can see the recipe and I can know that will not taste good. I can appreciate it looks good, but there's kind of a sort of dissociation there of people focusing only on what looks good because that's the way to communicate the taste of a dish and leaving sort of the flavor experience behind.
I think those are really great points, Charles. I found that before coming to America's Test Kitchen, I was styling completely based on what my client wanted, right? Like they don't care how you get there. Like you fake this or fake that, or, they don't care how you get to the final result. But one of the things that was most interesting for me coming to America's Test Kitchen is that they do not want anything that's fake, actually. They would rather have the team prepare the dish 3 times so that we have enough of it to shoot it as authentically as possible, so that what the person is seeing is what they get when they cook it at home, right? They should be able to look at those ingredients and say, that sounds as delicious as this picture looks. That's really important. And I think, in an age where like the visual is everything, I feel like not only as a seller, but a consumer, I want to be told the truth. Like I can appreciate food looking beautiful, but like I can also appreciate if you tell me that this pot of stew is not going to look beautiful, but it's going to taste amazing. Like there's something about being a consumer where I don't want to be lied to. Like, when I tell people I'm a food stylist, one of the first things they say to me is, the burgers on the McDonald's commercial never look the same when you go to McDonald's and get it, or it never looks as delicious. And I'm like, yeah, you got a point there. Like that is a perfect example of like good food styling and false delivery. I feel like, maybe this is just me, and I'm not saying that every food stylist has to subscribe to this, but I feel like morally, for me as a food stylist, I want to be presenting honest food to people. It's my job to make it look good, even if it's not beautiful. What can I do to make it look appealing? I can, with good conscience, sell you a burger that's not going to look like the burger that you get when you go buy it. I don't care how much money you're paying me to style it. I just can't do it. I don't want to. I don't want any parts of that false economy, right? That false consumerism. I don't.
Elle, just in case people aren't aware, can you just give a couple of examples of like what you mean by fake? Like
sure.
Mashed potatoes for ice cream, is it that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. I'm using maybe Crisco, coloring Crisco for ice cream. I've done things like using a bowl of Elmer's glue to look like milk in a bowl of cereal, which, I mean, something like that makes sense, right? Because cereal and milk is just going to get soggy over time, you know. So and glue looks like milk, so it's not like you're false advertising, but we do use lots of, you know, things to make things look hearty. Sometimes you'll see a bowl of salad. It might be stuffed with paper towel underneath it. It might not be as robust in real life as you would get when you take it home. And I think that there's a fine line with that. There's also like some legal, there's a legal background that I think came about because of like a Campbell soup ad where someone was basically suing that what the consumer was selling on the commercial or the advertisement was not the real thing. So there are actually some legitimate legal you know, rules behind how you can advertise food, right? And that's because people were taking it like far and beyond, you know, like this is not what the food does. Don't sell it on a packaging photo. Don't sell it and say it does this thing and it doesn't do that thing, right? So there are laws behind that. You have to, you know, there has to be like, I think it's like 80%, 60% real food items legally, right? So, but there's no limits to how far I'll go to make the food look good in terms of like pinning it or gluing it but I like to work with real food items. As I mentioned before, I like for people to be able to eat the food after we're styling. I do want to limit food waste, which was never a concern, say 20 years ago when food styling was around. You would just do it as many times as you needed to and then throw out whatever you didn't use, you know, and ethically that doesn't sit well with me. So I try to use all whole foods, real foods.
Must be something about the food styling on product packaging. That could be the real food, but the proportions are, in the UK at least, on your breakfast cereal packet, it's 300% what you're supposed to eat. So they're not being untruthful in terms of the materials, but just the amount of it makes it look more appealing than it should be.
I agree. And we actually work by that rule of odds. At least I do. You know, we're like odd numbers of foods look better than even numbers of foods. You know, maybe it's psychological. I don't remember learning that in culinary school, but it is a rule that I still use to this day. 3 things makes it look like someone ate the 4th thing. 4 things looks like no one ate your food.
Well, it's also mindset. You know, I think that if you know, if you go into a place and, you know, you're telling somebody, so Charles, like you did the thing where it was choose 3 or choose 4, but did you give them a scenario of how to feel when they were choosing it? You know, like, was it, you know, you're going out to a tasting menu, you know, and you're doing this and this is the mindset that you're in, or, you know, because I think that there's a time when people want to eat as much as possible. And then I think that there are also times where you go through and your mind is like in this thing of, I want to have this, you know, different experience. And so I think that it's mindset also has a lot to do with, you know, what you're going into. Cause I think, I mean, even for me, all the dishes, you know, that you showed of mine that were in the slides or whatever, every single one of those dishes was just a dish that we shot before it was taken out. Like we had just a like fluorescent light just sitting above our pass, and we would just literally, they're all shot on an iPhone. We just put an iPhone over and shoot a photo, and then that dish went out to somebody. And it was specifically for, you know, like the very reason like of what Elle's talking about, where, you know, you're presenting something that's not what it is. And so the dishes that we would shoot, it would just literally be like, we wouldn't go do a shoot for dishes. Like I've done them for, you know, like for say like a brand that's asking me to do something, but for my own work, I don't do that whatsoever. It's just, yeah, we made this, hurry up and take a photo of this, which is why some of the dishes we have maybe 1 or 2 photos of, and that's it, because we'll just click it twice and then, all right, get it out, hurry up. And all of those dishes were shot that way. Even that grid of the mocha one was just, the photographer was sitting right at the pass of the like little kitchen space that we built in Mocha. We just built him his own little pass, and we're like, here, we're giving you a dish, you can eat this dish, but here you go. And then he would just sit next to where we were plating for everybody, and instead of plating 28, we'd plate 29, and then he would get his own dish, and then he kind of gridded them together.
So I definitely want to come back to this idea of photographing food in general, because I think there's like a whole trend around that, and I wanted to ask you about that. But I wanted to hear from Arley about sort of like, how much is it about what it looks like versus how it smells versus how it tastes in your world?
Yeah, so I think like my side of the food world is a little different, because there are so many desserts that are made of like weird materials. Like cakes covered in fondant is like a very common thing, and cakes that are made to look like something completely other than cake is like a really common thing. That is personally not something that I work with. So for me, it's important that my desserts are beautiful, but also that every part of them tastes really good. So when you have these cakes that are like, they have like a wood structure, and they're like these huge, like towering desserts covered in like fondant and food dye, I think there's like, it gets to this level where it's just completely about like its look and its like visual impressiveness.
Wasn't there a sense that the first picture you showed after you was of like a cake with buildings around the side of it?
Yes. Yeah.
That's kind of like a cake that looks like something else, isn't it? It looks like a skyline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I will incorporate different like design elements into a cake, but those are also like, it was made of cookies that to me were really tasty, and not covered in like a ton of like sugary royal icing. So I definitely like, you know, I play with different like dimensions of design in the desserts that I make. But I do want every dimension of it to be something that is tasty and enjoyable to eat, and you know, has like a nice texture and flavor to it.
And so, Craig, you were kind of sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
I was going to actually jump in real quick with one of the questions from an audience member, to, I think more to Elle, but maybe Arley too, since we're talking about how you want people to want to eat it. And someone wants to know, do food stylists need to have perfect cooking skills as well?
I think the answer is maybe. If you are making food for visual consumption, I would say no. You know, as a food stylist, no, you don't. However, you should be following the recipe that you're given for styling generally. And if you're following that recipe, it should yield it should deliver what it promises, right? So ideally, if you follow a recipe, you'll get X result, and then you style that food. But to be honest, as long as, I mean, whether the recipe works or not for a food stylist is kind of inconsequential, right? That usually is not even, we don't even really have a say in that. Like the recipe is probably going to be printed in a publication, and the test kitchen has already determined that they want that recipe and it works and they want it to look like this. If you cook a recipe and it doesn't work the way that they say, I think it is important to give that feedback. But sometimes in terms of like the way things kind of deliver on camera, you know, like sometimes a photograph can make meat look darker than it is, or it can make meat look lighter than than it actually is. So in that case, where a recipe may call for you to cook something X amount of time, you can either taper back on the time or go ahead, further beyond that time to get the aesthetic that you want. So like, no knowing cooking something perfectly is not always the prerequisite for food styling. Food styling is about aesthetic. Should you know how to? I think you should at least know how to cook the recipes that you're shooting, Does that mean you need to know? Like, no, America's Test Kitchen is riddled with recipes that people cook for the first time. And some of those people are often home cooks who don't feel comfortable cooking. They rely on us because our recipes work as long as you follow them to the T. So you could have no experience and it could still come out beautifully. But this goes back to what I was saying about how I think that food stylists should have culinary experience, because it's that knowledge that will make you understand, oh, I need to undercook this meat for it to last longer. Or if I cook this meat a little longer, it will yield the result that I need. Those are the kind of things you need to know about food in order to make these types of educated decisions on food when you're shooting it. It makes a difference between an 8-hour day and a 12-hour day or a 10-hour, so knowing that is important. But no, you don't have to be like the best cook. You just have to know how to really follow directions. That's why apprenticing to become a food stylist is important. It teaches you how to follow directions.
Elle, you said something really, really interesting in there, which was like plating food just for visual consumption. And I think that is, that's kind of what we're talking about. And it also takes us back to this idea of all the people out there who are cooking their breakfast and they make them look just right. And then they take a photo of them and it's like all over their social media. And that's something that has just emerged over the last, 5 to 10 years. And now there are like half of my feed is full of food photos. So what do you all, I would love to hear what everybody makes of that. Has that changed what we expect when we go to a restaurant? Does it change how we think about the flavor of food as well? How does that speak to that?
So you might say something about the rise of blue food.
Oh, yeah.
It was something that didn't exist a few years ago, and all the commentators were telling us that it's unnatural, it's very rare in our cuisine, and no one would accept it. And yet, roll the clocks forward, and now it's very popular, especially on Instagram. So especially on the dish, and I can't really find any chefs who use blue because it seems like there's no purpose for it. It has no flavorful. It's just about the eye appeal. But on Instagram and other sites, then it is so many people using that blue food because it stands out, it captures attention, it looks unusual.
Well, it's made with butterfly pea flowers.
Can be.
That's been around for, and that's the thing is I think a lot of people, because they haven't been cooking for a very long time, and I think that it's a thing now that a lot of people haven't really cooked for a long time that are discovering certain things that have been parts of culture for many years or centuries, of all these things. And that's what I've noticed a lot in the last couple years since Instagram is there's a lot of stuff that if you had a traditional knowledge of a certain type of cuisine, and now a lot of it, and I think especially right now in colors, it's being presented as newer, but it's something that's been around for a long time in these, just traditional cuisines. But our obsession with, and obviously I think coronavirus has pushed that to a whole new level, but the color in food.
Did anyone else want to respond to the Instagram trends? If not,
I think for me, I was posting for a while, and I think I have 4 posts in the last year and a half or 2 years. I kind of went the opposite, where I just wanted people to, when they showed up, experience the thing not via Instagram before they got there, because I think that there's a lot of people that I would meet, and it was almost as it'd be like, oh man, yeah, it's they would in this weird way tell me that they've had my food, but they hadn't had it, and I'd be like, well, what do you mean? And it's like they're able to feel like they've had it because they've seen it on Instagram or something. Like it's this weird thing I think that humans are now doing via just social media, maybe. I don't know.
That sounds about right, Craig. Like, you know, people, because we're so limited with access, I think people are definitely taking like their visual consumption to the very extreme level. Like, oh, I've seen that before. I've done that, you know, before. But I mean, I definitely think the Instagram trend on food and beautiful food, it either inspires people completely to make their food look better or go out and have new food experiences like Craig's, or it makes them feel completely inadequate and turns them off and makes them either not want to cook or not feel brave enough to have experiential food opportunities, right? But you know, like as long as we're in the internet age where everything is very visual, more so now than ever, I think people are always going to be either falling short and wanting to catch up or actually doing that job. I personally think, and I'm saying this to everyone who's watching, I feel like, you know, people who food style for a living or work extra hard to make their food look great, they're usually getting paid to do that, right? Like they're posting paid ads, they're working with sponsors, you know, so it's kind of just their job on a digital level as opposed to like print or editorial or video or TV. You know, so like there's no need to feel like you have to make your food at home look like people do or like people make their food look on social media. Like consider social media as commercials as it relates to food, you know, like don't buy into that pressure, you know, like it's just not necessary. And if you're not doing it professionally, like don't feel pressured or obligated to put your food on social media platforms for scrutiny. Like that's not what food is about, whether food styling is involved or not. You know, food is not about that. It makes it very competitive. And I think, you know, these are the things that turn people off from cooking at home, you know, like some certain standard of perfection that they may very well never reach when it's really not even about that. Like if I'm not selling a product, I never take pictures of my plated food at home. As a food stylist, I never do it because I don't style my food at home. You know, like we need to be very honest about the use of food styling. Like, what are we doing? You know, Craig is selling an experience. You know, Arley is, I mean, she's selling beautiful cakes, but she's also selling a message of unity, you know, and Charles is helping people to understand why people approach food the way they do. You know, like we are doing this for like very specific and purposeful reasons. That's why we get paid to do it. If you're not getting paid to do it, enjoy your plate, enjoy your food, take the pressure off yourself. You don't have to make it look beautiful. It just has to taste good to the people who are, you know.
But something like Craig's dishes that look sort of fabulous. But I imagine if that was just a picture I saw of those sort of displays of color, could you guess what it was going to taste like?
No.
Yeah, I mean, that's also part of, you know, why I think why I mean with that concept, like with Wolvesmouth and what I do with that, more pushing it towards the art sense, is that you shouldn't be able to look at it and know exactly what it's going to taste like, because it's about discovery and it's about, you know, and maybe the look of that, you know, one thing is actually discussing a sculpture that I made that's on the other side of the room, and it's all kind of tying together that just, you know, in these different elements. And that's, so it's specifically made to make you, you know, just have some sort of sense of discovery.
I want to be surprised, Craig, to be honest with you. I don't, if I can look at it and guess, I'm not paying to come, right? I want to come there and have an experience that I can't anticipate, you know, but that's what that, to my point, that's what you're selling. You're not selling, here's beef ribs on the grill. They're going to taste like delicious, tender grilled beef. That's very predictable.
Yeah.
Delicious, you know, but yeah, you're selling the excitement, you know, the mystery of it. And I like that. That's amazing.
Right.
Those dishes must have do they have a name or presented?
Some of them do, and you know, it's like, I have a dish that I did, you know, it was literally like a day after the BP oil spill that happened here, and the dish was literally called FBP, you know, and it was like, and the whole dish, it was a seafood dish, and it was basically like it was like grits, you know, because I was also trying to kind of stay in that like New Orleans kind of Gulf kind of area. So I was trying to go flavors that were starting to like stay in that region. But it was it was like a grits that were like, had like a bunch of it was like a seafood stock that they were cooked in, and it was all this kind of like oysters and mussels and shrimp and stuff like that were basically kind of like laid along the shore, but they were all covered in this. It was kind of like it was made of charcoal, and because I was trying to like get this like quote unquote like burnt kind of look, and like this like oil kind of look from the fires and the oil, and it was like all over the seafood. So it was just like this, it just looked like this total mess of destruction, you know, that was just covering this like this beach of grits and like all these, you know, this seafood that was just kind of like on this like shoreline that had washed up. And so it's like stuff like that, you know, and that was just like a backhanded, it still had to taste good, and it still had to be, the technique had to be proper and everything else. But the dish literally was just a response to being like, this is bullshit. What are we doing? And that dish just kind of came out in that moment.
Well, and I love that, Craig, because it gets to this idea of food as political and food styling as political. And I wonder if, Arley, you, and I know Elle, you kind of mentioned that earlier as well, could speak to that, because one of the things that art does really well is it has the power to raise awareness about real issues in our world, and it has the power to speak to it has the power to speak to politics in a way that almost nothing else does. And I love the idea that food can do this too. So I would love to hear from maybe Arley, you first, and then Elle as well, if you want to.
Yeah, so I started to use my food as more of a platform. In 2017, I attended the Women's March on Inauguration Day, and I posted a picture of myself on my Arley Cakes Instagram page, holding up a clipping from the Washington Post that was my little protest sign. And you know, I said something along the lines of Black Lives Matter, women's rights are human's rights, like no humans are illegal. And I lost like hundreds of followers that day. I angered so many people. You know, people were like, oh, like, I'm just here for cake, like, don't bring politics into this. And for me, it was confusing because, you know, of my background, and the whole reason that I started Arley Cakes was for issues of social justice, but also it was frustrating because I am a woman and I'm Black. And, you know, when I talk about like Black Lives Matter, like this is a personal thing. It's just, you know, it's not just me like spouting off about some buzzword or whatever. Like, this is just who I am as a person, like wanting to be respected as a person. And so, yeah, it was just kind of frustrating that people were like, oh, ignore the fact that like you are, you know, worried about like your brothers, you know, being profiled by the police. Like, ignore the fact that like you don't know if you'll have autonomy over your body because I just want cake. So I decided to say, whatever, forget that. And in conversation with a friend, he was like, well, I was like, I don't know why people are so confused. Like, I've always been about these things. And he was like, well, why don't you just make it like the forefront of what you do? And like from the get-go, like, this is what you're about. Like, you stand for these issues and you're not gonna back down from that. So that was like, in early 2017, I kind of like pivoted.
Before August 11th and 12th on Charlottesville.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I left Charlottesville like a couple months before that, before August 11th. But yeah, so it's been a while that I've been, you know, using my baking to talk about Black Lives Matter and, you know, gay rights and all of that. So
did you find that your audience increased once you embraced that as sort of like,
oh yeah, like I lost a bunch of followers that day, but then gained like way more back in the coming days after that. And I think just over time, I think that people appreciate, you know, like we see so much food on the internet. All like you said, your feed is just food, pictures of food after pictures of food. And I think that people appreciate like, oh, this is food that's nice to look at, that's also talking about something that I care about.
Awesome, thanks.
So
you want to speak to that too?
Well, and also someone jumped in and asked this a little while ago. They're asking Arley and Elle if your work and our connections to your community has changed at all just in this past year.
Well, although I became the inclusion leader at ATK last year, like at the end of the year, so it was not as a result of any of the injustices that happened in 2020 so far. But I think when I came into the company in 2016, there was a very honest air of, we are not very diverse. We would like to become more diverse. We are, you know, figuring out what that looks like for us in terms of like hiring or representation in our media. And so, you know, some of the things that we started doing was really just like, it sounds very trivial, but, you know, looking at representation as we do our day-to-day work. Like, we're shooting food every single day. There are hands and bodies involved in those shoots, and you know, having more representation of like hands. It sounds very trivial, right? Like, hands are hands, you know, but it says something about having brown hands in a photo, you know, or, you know, not moving in spaces of dominant cultures, you know, in terms of representing who has access to this food and these recipes and kitchens and cooking, right? You know, like all families cook something, right? Whether it doesn't matter if it's the healthiest thing or not. All families, someone's cooking something all the time. And so, you know, some of the things that we've been very aware of is like actually hiring more people of color across the board, you know, and also how we represent recipes, you know, like we're representing recipes from a plethora of cultures, right? Like, you know, we have Cook's Country, which is part of our brand, which kind of travels the country and talks about the food that people are making. And not all of those people are born Americans. Some of them are immigrants, and some people are first generation Americans coming from immigrant families. And when we're representing those recipes, like, we need to be very true and specific to the culture that is representing, right? Like not putting this Eurocentric twist to it, if you will, you know, or like what I've heard some people call like the ethnic cleansing of recipes, you know, like just being true to the culture that the recipe comes from. Like it doesn't take away from anything, you know, and regardless of whether it does or not, we have to be being true to the recipe we're representing, not saying here's a better, easier way, or not even easier, because our whole thing is easier, but like not our way isn't better, our way is just different. This is our spin on how to do it with ingredients you can get from your local store, right? So that's important. So just, you know, really figuring out ways, not even figuring it out because it's very plain, but actively being more respectful of how we represent cultural recipes and the language that we use alongside those recipes. Like we should not be referring to any type of Asian food as takeout. It's disrespectful, right? You know, it is not takeout food. It is Chinese food. It might be Chinese American food, but it's not takeout food, you know? So, you know, it has definitely changed the culture of our company, you know, and how we want to be aware of how we're affecting people who are viewing our food. You know, just because someone is white doesn't mean that they don't respect other cultures, and it's disrespectful to those who respect cultures to not be careful how we handle food of different peoples, whether they're Russian, Lithuanian, Chinese, Ethiopian. Like it's all important, you know. And you know, I hope that that's a huge culture shift that's changing across the food paradigm. I hope that everyone is being more cognizant of that.
And would that extend to the cutlery you use as well? That if it's a Chinese dish, then it should be shown with chopsticks, perhaps?
Yes,
and some other Asian countries, not with. Not.
Yes, absolutely. Even like we started working on an Asian cookbook. We completely withdrew the project because after doing our deeper research, we realized that it was not approached properly, you know, and like being able to look at a project, even if it's almost done, to say, you know what, we didn't do this right. You know, maybe this should be a book about all things that can be cooked in a wok, you know, and here are the proper instruments you use for that wok. That might be a better approach to it, you know, but like, you got to be able to step back and look at, you know, like we're even just reevaluating all the things that already exist on the web. And ATK is like 20 years old, you know. We have to look at all the things that we put out into the world and decide what, you know, like what is just inappropriate and should not be out in the world. We need to withdraw that, you know, and what is actually on the mark and how do we keep moving forward with that, you know. Like it was very tragic to watch Bon Appetit go through what they went through in the ways that they did, you know, but like, okay, we've learned from that. If your publication is not working to change the way the conversations are had about food, we're not even really honoring food, you know, like we're not, and that's just not, that's not American. It's not realistic. It's just not.
And Craig, you said for the couple of the dishes you were showing pictures of, people should eat it with their hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was
take it out of any reference of any cultural practice. It's not knife and fork. It's not chopstick. It's something else.
It's kind of meant to be this like primal, you know, just strip everything away. And it, you know, it was interesting to watch just how different people reacted different ways. And then at the end of that meal, on your last, the last course, there was like this room that I built out, and it was like all this like snow and stuff that I had these like snow machines kind of like dropping from the ceiling, and there was like all this kind of like snow going on, and you know, your dessert came with like a pair of safety glasses, and then like we'd give everybody safety glasses, and then they would finish their dessert. And it was just kind of like meant to like just like look like this like pile of ice, but there's like a bunch of stuff underneath it. And then there's, you know, like this kind of curtain opens up, and then everybody, it's just supposed to be more of this kind of like cathartic thing. And like, it's just like, take your dessert plate and smash it. And there's like this wall. And so everybody's like throwing like this lot, like their dessert plate at this wall and smashing it. And then there was kind of this deer that was like on the ground, and then lying like around the deer was this snow, but then the concept was over the course of, you know, this 5 months of doing this installation, because like when we do installations, we do them for a long time. So like MoCA, like when we were at MoCA, we were there for 5 months. And so this other installation they were doing, these plates would build up over time, and then they were kind of these like shards of snow that were going to start building up kind of like around this like deer that was kind of like laying on the ground. And it was just kind of like more just like representative of just everybody who's passed through, and how this like destruction that they've all been a part of, you know, has, you know, created this piece. But and so it was kind of like this destructive element, but then also this like community element, that it was like also a thing that they'd also participated in. So it was kind of like, I like the cognitive dissonance, playing with cognitive dissonance a lot. And, you know, just this, you know, something is really like, something's not great, but it's also great. And how do you bat those back together? And how do you, how are we able to justify and also just not even acknowledge some things, because we would just cripple under the weight of that destruction. So subconsciously, we just don't even think about it. And so that was kind of like this whole thing. And it was, I mean, we had a couple of people that the very act of just breaking the plate, like we had one guy who just started crying, and we're like, hey, like, you know, this not meant to, and he was just like, I don't know what's wrong. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I don't know why I can't do this. And it was something about, brought up something from, I think when he was maybe younger or whatever, but it was just this idea of like, you know, he like got into this thing of like, we're just like smashing this. Like, what's the point of this? Like, why would we just like, you know, just destroy something? And, you know, and then some people found it really fun. And then some people would ask, well, why are we doing this? And so it just created this whole dialogue amongst everybody at this, you know, installation. And at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, you know, it's there. I want stuff to be, you know, like when I do my art installations or I'm doing that stuff, we want to have people connect and do some sort of dialogue and have some sort of aspect of it, because I think that with art or artistic experiences in general, they're, you know, especially going to, I mean, shows and stuff growing up, it's like people skim past stuff a lot of the times. And so when you're in an experience for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, piece over there, how does that relate to, and you have this time to actually really digest, I mean, pun intended, you know, but like you have like this time to like digest like what the work actually is and what it's trying to say. And you're not looking at it for 17 seconds and then going like, oh, cool. Okay. Like you can look at it for 17 seconds, but you're sitting there for a couple of hours. You're kind of like, oh, I'm going to maybe go look at that again. And then maybe it makes you talk to your, you know, the person that you're sitting next to pre-COVID, you know, and just creates a different dialogue. And then all of a sudden, you know, it's, I mean, a lot of the pieces like that I did for the MoCA installation that I did, it was literally about all the stuff that ended up blowing up and happening this year, with a lot of the, you know, there was a lot of stuff about, I mean, part of it was like about economics. There was like a whole thing that was about religion. There was like all these things kind of going on in it, but just like, if you just walked through and looked at it, you wouldn't have been able to really get that. And that's why when people came in, we gave them a menu and then we gave them a book that described how everything flowed together. Mm-hmm. So they kind of had like a key to go with the menu, because while art should have some sort of like mystique to it and it should have some sort of like make your own interpretation, I also wanted people to understand kind of what we were trying to do, because otherwise it would have just felt like a dinner with some art stuff next to it. And so I wanted to have something that was like, here is why and how it all fits together, all these senses.
Yeah, I love the way that your work, right, has is very clearly drawing the line between food and performance art, because in some ways, like every meal that we eat could be considered a performance work, especially if we photograph it afterward and put it on our Instagram.
Yeah.
And that it's interesting to see you kind of like drawing out those connections in a more clear way. We did have a question that kind of touched, I think, on what you were saying, Elle, and what your work is about, Arley. It's coming from an Indigenous Australian perspective, but I think the question sort of, this Sam was talking about sort of how First Nations plant species in Australia have sort of been devalued and erased, and that plant-based gastronomy was devalued and erased, but is now garnering interest in a way that is colonizing their ingredients rather than creating cultural agency on a plate. And the question is sort of, how would you incorporate and value the intangible heritage and the cultural value of gastronomy, which I think, Elle, you sort of touched on, but I just wanted to know if anybody had any further thoughts about that. And then after that, I want to ask a question about community and how community and family affects our sort of experience of food and the art of food. And then I think we should probably wrap it up. But any sort of feedback on the intangible heritage in the cultural value of gastronomy?
I've been encouraging, and you probably will have started to see it unfold on ATK social, and it will start to roll out on our magazines, where we have kind of taken a step back from having our recipes represented just by people who work at the company, especially when you work in like a very homogenous cultural setting like ATK was. It's changing now, but when you just have people who work there representing the recipe, like that's just kind of how it had always been and always gone. And so we decided to start moving into a space where we are creating platforms for BIPOC communities to be representing their own recipes, right? Like that's really the only way to do it. I mean, not the only way, but it definitely is like the most honest and interesting way to do it, right? Like you could have anyone explain something to you, but what comes off when you have someone who has a genuine relationship with said thing, and in this case food, when they are the ones actually having the conversations and teaching about the food, that's when the real learning happens, because it's more than just like the food of a culture. It's also the food of like a particular family unit, and I say that because we're going to move into a conversation about community, but like just moving into a space where we are, just giving a platform to people who want to represent food in the way that it is most authentic to them. Not every Asian person specializes in Asian food. Some specialize in French food. So it's not necessarily about born culture. It's about your preferred food culture, that you feel resonates with you, touches you, and so just making sure that we're not tokenizing people by assuming that because they're this, they cook that, but just creating a platform where people can talk about food as it relates to them in a real genuine way. And I feel like when you do that, no matter what, as long as you have a person who has a genuine connection with the food representing the dish, you should be good to go. I would love personally to see more Aboriginal food, like represented. I think that's amazing, highly untapped and very important, so if you're interested and you would like to talk about your food at America's Test Kitchen, you should reach out to me. That's not a shameless plug. That's just like, here's a platform for underserved, underrepresented people. If you would love to do that, I would love to hear from you.
Thanks, Elle. We'll make sure we make that connection. Any comments about community and food? And then we'll wrap it up for the evening. Really how other people help us smell, taste, appreciate visual appreciation of food. Charles, was there any research on that? Not yet.
Most of the food psychology stuff tends to be on the weirdos, as they're called. Western industrialized, rich democratic boys and girls studying psychology, so not a very representative pool. But things are, I guess, spreading out. I'm sort of mulling over the thing about the ingredients of a place, but then how they are transformed on the way around the world. And if I want to know about coffee or chocolate, or probably there are different stories to be told, I suppose, about from those who grow the beans to those who roast to those who prepare the thing at the end. So there's multiple perspectives, I guess, isn't it? I think that's or whether any or think about chili is what I'm fascinated by at the moment. And so, emerging, how has that taken over the world? The chili pepper, from its discovery, so-called, in sort of Colombia and Mexico 500 years ago. Now it has become such a central part of so many cuisines. Because those who have taken over, or those who've incorporated those ingredients from a far distant part of the world, are also part of the story.
Well, I think for me, my personal focus on, I guess, like a community aspect, when I first started Wolvesmouth, and I did it for 10 years, like for 10 years straight, it was pay what you can afford. And so we had, it was literally, it was donation based. And so for that, the whole concept, it was less about the food aspect of it. It was more of, I'm going to give you some creative, whatever food. I mean, obviously it's like, has to be, first and foremost, it has to hit the marks of being every technique, everything has to be solid. The food has to be solid. But it was about making it as democratic as possible because, I'm a kid who grew up on welfare. I grew up on welfare, WIC, food stamps, all that stuff. And so there was a part of it, when I created it, it was about being able to just give people an opportunity, if they wanted to go try something that it's, would otherwise seem as though it was unattainable, or, oh, this is something I would never have access to. And I did that for 10 years straight, and that was the only concept of Wolvesmouth, was donation based. And, we were doing that, 4 days a week for literally a decade. And so with that, it was
about community.
Well, and and you go through, and and the type of people, you would have people that would be well off, and then you'd have people that, we had plenty of people that would send us things saying like, oh, hey, I'm a single mom, I work 2 jobs, this is, I just came across this on whatever, whatever they find it on, and but I don't have, really the means to go. And I'd say, okay, cool, just come in, we'll feed you, who cares? And then they would show up, and we did that, plenty of times. And because obviously, everything is a business, and you're trying to, make ends meet, and you're trying to do that. But it's also, if that's the only thing that's going to drive you, like, I don't understand the point of doing anything. If the end all be all is just like, how much cash can I squeeze out of something? I don't know. I'm more of a process person that's like into creating, probably to a detriment. But I think anybody who creates, stuff, or that's in the food industry, is, if you're not fine with not making gobs and gobs of money, then it's the wrong industry to get in anyways. And I think, I don't know, just figuring out different ways of exposing creativity to people. And, you know, because somebody who may be really into food, but they're not as into, say, like the art space, and then all of a sudden, you know, they come in and they have this experience, and then it opens their eyes to like, oh, you know, this could be a little more, you know, like I could open my eyes to thinking that other things can be creative and put through a creative lens. Because I think at the end of the day, life without, I mean, everything starts out as art. Every single thing. Like if you make a pair of shoes, it started out somehow as art. I mean, design is art, you know, all this stuff is art. And so I think that I've just always been interested in how do you get people to realize that, you know, rather than looking at a plate of food and saying, oh, that's, you know, like that only looks like it's 4 bites of food. That's stupid, you know, and then they get like in this mindset, and then like, well, it's one of 10 courses. Like, this is a lot of food, but, you know, it's trying to get past that first layer of the snap judgment of what it is and what you think it is. And if you can get past that, and then all of a sudden that person, you know, is able to see it for a little bit more than, you know, than what it is. I mean, you know, just like what Arley does, it's like being able to, you know, tie a message to something. You're getting in on one level through, oh man, you know, like these pastries are really good. Oh, I really love this. And it opens a door to dialogue. And I think at the end of the day, without dialogue, I mean, well, we are seeing a world without dialogue right now. We are living in a world where the dialogue is not matching up.
Yeah, I love, I think actually that's a great place to finish. This idea that everything starts with art, and that even food can create really powerful dialogue in our world. This conversation has gone in so many interesting directions, so thank you all so much. Our next Art in Life program will be in February, and we will be exploring the way that children's books are a form of art in our lives. And if you haven't already, check out our past Art in Life programs, which are about wine labels and tattoos. So if you're interested in how those are as well, check them out. A huge thank you to all 4 of our panelists and all of you who attended this event. Thanks for staying with us. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.